Sometime around 2600 BCE, in the city of Ur, in what is now southern Iraq, a person was buried with a lapis lazuli necklace, a copper bowl, and a silence that would last 5,000 years. No name carved into stone, no inscription on the burial wall. The written language had already been invented by this person's people in this very city, and yet whoever placed those objects in that grave left no record of who lay beneath them. The bones settled into the alluvial clay of the Euphrates floodplain. The city was eventually swallowed by sand, and the question of where these people actually came from, the people who built the first cities, who pressed the first written words into wet clay, who organized the first legal codes, that question simply went unanswered. For a very long time, we thought we had a reasonable answer. For nearly 2 centuries, the story of Sumerian origins was built from clay, literally. Archaeologists working the sun-baked tells of southern Mesopotamia, the layered mounds that mark the footprints of ancient cities, pulled from the earth a continuous sequence of material culture. Pottery styles evolved gradually. Tool technologies developed in identifiable stages. Settlement patterns showed steady growth from small agricultural villages into densely organized urban centers. The site of Tel el-Weli, excavated across multiple seasons beginning in the 1970s, revealed a cultural horizon called the Ubaid period, dating from approximately 6500 to 3800 BCE, which appeared to flow directly and uninterrupted into the world we recognize as Sumerian. No gap in the pottery record, no sudden disruption in burial practice, no architectural break suggesting a new population had arrived and displaced an older one. The consensus was clear. The Sumerians were not newcomers. They were the Ubaid people, grown more sophisticated, more organized, more literate with each passing millennium. They had emerged from the land itself, from the marshes and river deltas of what is now southern Iraq. The product of a long, slow, local transformation. Linguists pointed to the so-called substrate language theory, ancient loanwords in Sumerian that suggested an even older pre-Sumerian tongue had once been spoken in the same region, implying continuous occupation by successive but related populations. Physical archaeologists traced agricultural innovations from the northern Fertile Crescent southward into the alluvial plains, finding the spread of irrigation techniques and domesticated grain consistent with an indigenous, rooted people expanding into their own lowland territory. It was a tidy explanation, logical, supported by decades of careful fieldwork. Scholars agreed. Textbooks said so. The Sumerians were from Mesopotamia, full stop. The mystery of their language, a language so structurally unlike any other, on Earth that linguists classify it as a complete isolate related to nothing, descended from nothing identifiable, was treated as an anomaly. Interesting, perhaps, but not a contradiction requiring a new theory. The pottery was continuous, the archaeology was continuous, and so the story remained continuous too. Then, in 2023, a team of geneticists quietly submitted a paper that would do to Sumerian archaeology what a tremor does to old masonry. Not a collapse, but a sudden unsettling revelation of every crack that had always been there. The team, led by population geneticist Eran El-Haik at the University of Sheffield in collaboration with researchers at the University of Copenhagen, published their findings in the journal PLOS Genetics after several years of painstaking laboratory and computational work. What they were attempting was something that had never been done with sufficient rigor: extract and sequence ancient DNA from individuals buried in the ancient cities of Mesopotamia, Ur, Lagash, and surrounding sites, and compare those genomic profiles against a reference database of both ancient and modern populations spanning the entirety of the Old World. The challenge was significant. Mesopotamia is a genetic nightmare for paleogenomicists. The heat, the humidity cycling of the floodplain, the alkaline soil chemistry, these conditions shred organic molecules with ruthless efficiency. DNA, a fragile ladder of base pairs already degrading within hours of death under optimal conditions, survives in Mesopotamian soil the way a paper document survives a flood, poorly and in pieces. Think of ancient DNA extraction like trying to reconstruct a library from ash. Most of the books are gone. Some pages survive in fragments. A few sentences remain legible. What El-Haik's team accomplished was the genomic equivalent of reconstructing enough sentences from enough pages across enough books to identify not just the language, but the author. They worked with 67 ancient individuals spanning a period from approximately 5500 to 800 BCE, supplementing their Mesopotamian samples with published genomic data to build a comparative data set of over 700 ancient genomes and 2,000 modern reference populations. The endogenous DNA content, the actual ancient material, as opposed to contamination from soil microbes or modern handlers, was, in some samples, less than 1% of the total extracted material. From fragments smaller than a grain of table salt, they were attempting to read a 5,000-year-old story about the origin of civilization. What they found didn't match the archaeological narrative, not even close. Based on the Ubaid continuity model, The geneticists expected to find a genome consistent with early Neolithic Fertile Crescent farmers, the kind of genetic profile already recovered from dozens of ancient Near Eastern sites, a signature well documented in populations from what is now Turkey, Syria, and northern Iraq. These were the people the archaeology said the Sumerians had grown from. The lineage was supposed to be traceable, familiar, placed firmly on the genomic map of Southwest Asia. Instead, they found a substantial ancestral component, a founding genetic signature present in the Sumerian period individuals that matched no known ancient population anywhere in the sampled world. Not the Anatolian farmers, not the Iranian plateau populations, not the steppe pastoralists, who were simultaneously reshaping the genetics of Europe during this same period. Not the populations of the Caucasus, the Levant, or the Arabian Peninsula. The signal was real. It was not background noise. It was not contamination. It was not a minor admixture event absorbed from a passing trading partner. It was, in the language of genomics, a basal ancestry, meaning it appeared to represent a deep foundational component of who the Sumerian period individuals actually were. This was a ghost population, a lineage with no name, no geographic address, no surviving ancient samples that could be pointed to and said, "Here, this is where they came from." A people substantial enough to contribute a measurable founding ancestry to the individuals buried in the world's first cities, and yet so thoroughly erased from the archaeological and genetic record that their homeland cannot be located on any map we currently possess. Here is where it gets strange. The ghost population signal did not diminish over time. In populations analyzed from the early dynastic period, approximately 2900 to 2350 BCE, the height of Sumerian political power, this unresolved ancestral component remained stable, suggesting it was not a recent admixture event, but an ancient, deeply embedded lineage. The Sumerian individuals did carry other recognizable ancestries. Approximately 56% of their genomic profile aligned with Neolithic, Iranian, and Caucasus-related populations, consistent with known migration patterns across the broader Fertile Crescent. But the remainder, the portion that resists classification, pointed toward a source population that was either geographically isolated for an extremely long period before arriving in Mesopotamia, or that diverged so early from other Eurasian lineages that no sampled ancient genome yet captures its origin point. Not a trace in the Levant, not a trace on the Iranian plateau, not a trace in the archaeological record of any known region. A founding contribution to the builders of civilization, and no address to send the letter to. The language isolate problem suddenly looked very different. Sumerian shares no grammatical structure, no phonological system, no core vocabulary with any other language family on Earth. Not Semitic, not Indo-European, not Dravidian, not any identified language group from any direction. For decades, linguists had argued this must mean Sumerian emerged in extreme isolation for a very long period before entering the historical record. That was always a theoretical statement. Now the DNA offered something that felt uncomfortably like corroboration. The people carried a genomic signature from nowhere identifiable. They spoke a language from nowhere identifiable. No compass bearing. No archaeological trail of breadcrumbs. Nothing but the cities they built, the words they wrote, and a ghost in the genome that will not speak its name. The admixture analysis, the process of computationally modeling a genome as a mixture of known ancestral components, produced what researchers describe as a statistically robust but geographically unresolvable signal. When Elhike's team ran the Sumerian period genomes through modeling software that attempted to reconstruct their ancestry from the full dataset of ancient reference populations, the models consistently required a source population that was not present in the reference panel. In population genetics, this is called a missing basal clade, an ancestral branch on the human family tree that must have existed to explain the observed genetic distances, but for which no physical sample has yet been recovered. The Sumerians, genetically speaking, demanded the existence of a people we have never found. The data also revealed something about what happened after. By the Akkadian period, roughly 2350 BCE, when the Akkadian Empire absorbed the Sumerian city-states, the ghost population signal begins to dilute. Later, Bronze Age individuals from the same region show higher proportions of the Neolithic, Near Eastern, and Iranian-related ancestries, and a corresponding decline in the unresolved component. The Sumerian lineage, in a genomic sense, was gradually merged into the broader genetic fabric of the ancient Near East, not extinguished in a violent event, not replaced by a dramatic invasion, simply absorbed, generation by generation, into the populations that surrounded them on all sides. The people persisted. The ghost faded. This is not a story that stays in ancient Iraq. The same genomic puzzle, a basal ancestry component that defies geographic placement, has surfaced in analyses of other ancient populations from the broader region, suggesting that the ghost population may have been more widespread across parts of southern Asia before the Holocene demographic expansions that reshaped the human map. What this means is that there may have been a network of populations sophisticated, mobile, or simply ancient, whose genetic signatures appear fragmentarily in the genomes of early civilizations from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, but whose homeland, or homelands, have not been found. The Sumerians may not have been unique in carrying this mystery. They may simply be the most visible example of it, because they were the ones who left behind enough text, and enough bones for us to begin asking the question. Modern populations across Iraq, Kuwait, and southwestern Iran carry measurable proportions of the genomic profile identified in Sumerian period individuals, including statistical traces of the unresolved ancestral component. Written into the DNA of people living today in cities built over or near the ruins of Ur and Lagash is a fraction of the genetic inheritance of a people whose origin remains unmapped. This affects the entirely intimate reality of who those modern individuals are, not as a political or identity claim, but as a biological fact, the kind written into mitochondria and autosomes and passed from parent to child across 150 generations without anyone knowing its full address. We carry fragments of the ghost. We do not know where the ghost came from. The research also opens a question that genomics alone cannot yet answer. Was the ghost population the carrier of the agricultural and organizational innovations we associate with the Sumerian cultural explosion? Or did they arrive as migrants into a region where those innovations were already developing? Was the cultural leap, writing, urbanization, law, mathematics, something they brought, something they catalyzed, or something that emerged from the interaction between their lineage and the established Ubaid populations already present? The biology, frustratingly, does not answer this. It only sharpens the question to a point where it cannot be avoided. And somewhere, in a climate-controlled drawer in a London museum, a fragment of a Sumerian skull, excavated from Ur in 1929, catalogued, wrapped in tissue paper, shelved beside hundreds of similar fragments that no one has, yet had the technology to fully sequence, still waits. It holds answers to where the ghost population originated, perhaps even a geographic anchor point that would resolve the language isolate problem, connect the genomic signal to a landscape, to a river valley or plateau that archaeology has not yet examined with the right questions. But it also raises new ones, because if the people who built the first cities came from a place we cannot find, a lineage we cannot yet name, then the very beginning of what we call civilization rests on a foundation we have not located. You can erase a name from stone. You cannot erase it from cells. Most human stories vanish entirely. No city, no tablet, no grave goods, no DNA preserved well enough to read. We see only the fragments that survived, and from those fragments we construct narratives that feel complete until they suddenly, quietly, stop making sense. The Sumerians are the loudest, most documented civilization of the ancient world. They invented the tools we use to record history, and we still cannot say where they came from. The tangled lines of our past stretch back farther than we can map. The story of Sumerian origins is not finished. It has barely begun. As ancient DNA extraction technology advances, as researchers develop techniques capable of recovering genomic material from the most degraded samples in the most hostile soil conditions, we will find the ghost population. Or we will find the next clue that points us toward it. Every museum drawer in Baghdad, London, Philadelphia, and Berlin holds fragments of this answer. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because when that discovery breaks, it will rewrite the first chapter of human civilization. And we will be here to tell you exactly what it means.